Archaeologists expected to find stones. What they found instead was something far stranger. A human figure sealed inside a wall, not standing proudly in the center of a temple, not buried like a body. Hidden horizontally inside the architecture itself, as if someone had placed it there deliberately, then closed the stones around it forever. And this was only one of the disturbing clues. Around that hidden figure stood faceless stone giants, carved thousands of years before the pyramids, surrounded by snakes, scorpions, vultures, wild boars, headless bodies, and human skulls that had been cut, modified, and possibly displayed in rituals we still do not fully understand. This is Göbekli Tepe, a place so old it should not exist. A place built before cities, before writing, before the wheel, and possibly before farming itself became the center of human life. For generations, we believed civilization followed a simple path. First, humans learned to farm. Then they settled down. Then they built villages. Then cities. And only after all of that came temples, gods, priests, and organized religion. But Göbekli Tepe turns that story upside down. Because here, in the rolling limestone hills of southeastern Turkey, hunter-gatherers appear to have gathered before the age of cities and built something enormous. Something planned, something symbolic, something that demanded labor, food, ritual, and belief on a scale that should not have been possible. And that leaves us with a question far more unsettling than who built it. Why did they build it? What power, what fear, or what obsession could make people with no metal tools, no wheels, no domesticated work animals, and no written language carve massive pillars out of stone and drag them across a barren hilltop? What happened inside those circular enclosures? Why were the pillars shaped like faceless beings? Why were the walls filled with predators, snakes, vultures, and signs of death? And why, after centuries of effort, was this sacred place swallowed by the earth? To understand the mystery of Göbekli Tepe, we have to go back almost 12,000 years. The Ice Age is ending. The world is changing. The great ice sheets are retreating, the climate is warming, and scattered groups of hunter-gatherers are moving across the ancient landscapes of the Near East, following animals, seasons, water, and survival. There are no great cities, no empires, no kings, no written records, no pyramids, no Stonehenge, no Sumer, no Egypt. By the old version of history, these people should have been too primitive, too scattered, and too busy surviving to build anything monumental. They should have been small bands moving from place to place, hunting wild animals, gathering plants, and trying to stay alive. But on a hill near modern-day Şanlıurfa, something happened. Nomadic people stopped moving. They gathered, they carved, they built. And what they created was not a shelter, not a fortress, not a village. It was a ritual landscape of stone circles, massive T-shaped pillars, strange animal carvings, and symbols that still feel disturbingly alive. Some of the pillars were over 5 meters tall. Some weighed many tons. And all of this was done with simple stone tools, human hands, and a level of organization that archaeologists once believed did not exist at that time. That is why Göbekli Tepe is not just an archaeological site. It is a problem, a beautiful, terrifying problem. Because if hunter-gatherers built this before farming societies fully took shape, then maybe we have been telling the story of civilization backwards. Maybe humans did not build temples because they had already become civilized. Maybe they became civilized because something inside them demanded temples. Maybe belief came first and civilization followed. But Göbekli Tepe almost vanished without anyone realizing what it was. In 1963, a joint archaeological survey from the University of Istanbul and the University of Chicago examined the hill. They saw worked stones. They saw flint tools. They noticed limestone blocks sticking out of the ground. But they made a mistake that would delay the discovery for decades. They thought the stones were probably part of a medieval cemetery, so the site was recorded, dismissed, and left behind. For years, local farmers worked the land. Their plows struck strange stones beneath the soil. Some were moved, some were broken, some were ignored. Nobody yet understood that the hill was not just a hill. It was an artificial mound covering one of the most important prehistoric discoveries ever made. But the local people had never treated the place as ordinary. The hill had long carried a sacred reputation. It was known as a place of wishes, a place people visited with hope, reverence, and unease. Long before archaeologists understood what was buried there, the landscape itself seemed to hold a memory. Then, in the 1990s, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt revisited the old survey reports. When he reached the site and saw the amount of flint scattered across the ground, he realized something was wrong. This was not a medieval cemetery. This was much older, much stranger, much bigger. Excavations began in 1995, and almost immediately the earth started revealing things that should not have been there. Circular and oval enclosures emerged from the mound. Walls of stone, smooth floors, massive T-shaped pillars arranged around central pairs of even larger monoliths. The most famous of these, Enclosure D, is still one of the most powerful spaces ever uncovered from the prehistoric world. Two enormous central pillars stand facing each other like silent beings. Around them, smaller pillars form a ring, and carved across the stones are animals that do not feel decorative. They feel like warnings. Foxes, boars, snakes, scorpions, vultures, cranes, predators, venomous creatures, creatures associated with death, danger, and the boundary between the living and the dead. And this is where Göbekli Tepe begins to feel less like a simple temple and more like a message we can no longer read. Because the people who built it did not fill the stones with peaceful scenes of daily life. They did not show families cooking. They did not show hunters proudly killing gazelle. They did not carve ordinary village life. Instead, they carved the things that frighten human beings. Animals that bite, animals that sting, animals that tear flesh, animals that feed on the dead. It is as if the entire place was designed around danger, around fear, around death, or around the desperate need to control those things through ritual. And then there are the pillars themselves. At first glance, they look abstract, T-shaped slabs of limestone. But look closer, and something unsettling becomes clear. They are not just stones, they are bodies. On some pillars, long arms are carved along the sides. Hands reach toward the front of the stone and rest near the abdomen. Belts and loincloths are carved across them. The T-shape is not random. The horizontal top may represent a head, the vertical shaft, a torso. These are not simple architectural supports. They are stylized human-like beings. But they have no faces, no eyes, no mouths, no expressions. They stand in silence, towering over the enclosures like blind, mute watchers. And that detail changes everything, because a faceless human figure is not merely unfinished. It is intentional. A face gives identity. A face gives personality. A face allows connection. But these beings have none. They feel less like people and more like presences. Ancestors, spirits, gods, or something older than gods. Something from a time before humans had written names for the forces they feared. Imagine entering one of these enclosures at night. The sky above is black. Or perhaps, as some researchers suggest, the space may have been roofed or partially covered, making the darkness even thicker. Torches flicker against the limestone. The carved animals seem to move in the firelight. Snakes twist across the stones. A scorpion waits in silence. A vulture spreads its wing. And in the center stand two faceless beings, taller than any person in the room. No eyes, no mouth, no mercy. Now ask yourself a simple question. What kind of ceremony happened here? The answer may lie in one of Göbekli Tepe's darkest clues: human skulls. Archaeologists found fragments of human crania with deep, deliberate cuts and grooves. These were not random marks. They appear to have been made after death. The skulls may have been defleshed, modified, and perhaps decorated or suspended. In many ancient cultures, the skull was not just bone. It was the seat of identity, the container of memory, the link between the living and the dead. At Göbekli Tepe, it is possible that skulls were part of ritual practices, displayed or handled in ways that connected the community to ancestors, spirits, or the afterlife. And suddenly, the animal carvings become even more disturbing. The vultures, the snakes, the headless human forms, the faceless stone beings. They are not random decorations. They belong to a world obsessed with death and transformation. A world where the dead may not have been hidden away and forgotten. They may have been present, watched, displayed, remembered, feared. One of the most famous stones at the site is Pillar 43, often called the Vulture Stone. Its carvings are among the most debated in prehistoric archaeology. A large vulture appears with an outstretched wing. Near it is a small headless human figure. Other symbols surround the scene. To some, this looks like a story. A soul leaving the body, a ritual of death, a journey from earth to sky. In ancient landscapes, vultures were not just scavengers. They were creatures that consumed the flesh of the dead. To us, that may seem horrifying. But to some early communities, the vulture may have represented transformation, a being that carried the dead out of the human world and into another realm. If that is true, then Pillar 43 may not simply be art. It may be one of the earliest surviving attempts to carve a vision of the afterlife into stone. But Göbekli Tepe was not only about death. It was also about gathering. And that raises another mystery. How did hunter-gatherers feed the people needed to build this place? Because carving and moving huge limestone pillars was not a casual activity. It required planning, coordination, labor, food, water, motivation, and probably leadership. The people of Göbekli Tepe had no metal chisels, no draft animals, no wheels, no cranes. The stones were cut from nearby limestone quarries using flint tools. Then they had to be shaped, moved, raised, and arranged. Even moving a single massive pillar would have required many people working together. So why would scattered hunter-gatherers do it? One answer is feasting. Archaeologists found enormous quantities of animal bones at the site: gazelle, wild boar, red deer, wild cattle. The remains suggest large-scale consumption of wild animals, not ordinary meals for a small family group, but gatherings, events, perhaps seasonal assemblies where different groups came together. And then there are the stone vessels, large carved containers that may have held liquids. Some researchers have suggested that traces found in similar contexts may point toward fermented drinks made from wild grains. In other words, Göbekli Tepe may have been powered not by slavery, not by a king, and not by an empire, but by something much more human. Ritual, food, drink, community, fear, belief. Imagine people arriving from distant areas during certain seasons. They bring stories, they bring offerings, they bring labor. Animals are slaughtered, meat is cooked, fermented drinks are shared. Songs or chants echo between the stones. And then, under the command of a belief system we can barely understand, they work together to raise another pillar. This may be one of the deepest lessons of Göbekli Tepe. Human beings do not need cities to create complexity. Sometimes they only need a reason powerful enough to gather. And nothing gathers people like the sacred. But then came a discovery that made the site even harder to explain. In recent excavation seasons, archaeologists uncovered a human statue placed inside the wall of a structure. Its position was strange. It was not standing openly. It was not displayed as the center of worship. It had been laid horizontally, sealed into the architecture itself. That image is difficult to forget. A human form hidden inside a sacred wall, surrounded by faceless stone beings. Why? Was it a foundation offering? A ritual deposit? A symbolic burial? A captured spirit? A memory of a person who mattered? Or was it meant to give life to the building itself? We do not know. But the placement feels deliberate. And in archaeology, deliberate concealment often matters as much as display. What a culture hides can be just as meaningful as what it shows. Then there is the strange sculpture often called the totem pole. It is a vertical composition of connected figures. At the top, a powerful predator-like creature. Below it, human-like forms. Serpents run along the sides. The entire object feels like a transformation scene, a collision between human beings, animals, death, and something supernatural. It is not calm art. It is not decorative art. It is art that feels charged, as if the people who made it were trying to show that the human world and the animal world were not separate, that predators, spirits, ancestors, and people all belong to the same terrifying system. And once you see that, Göbekli Tepe stops feeling like a place where humans simply worshipped nature. It feels like a place where humans negotiated with it. They were not above the wild world. They were inside it, dependent on it, threatened by it, surrounded by animals that could feed them, kill them, or consume their bodies after death. Maybe the carvings were not meant to celebrate animals. Maybe they were meant to hold them back. Maybe the pillars were guardians. Maybe the monsters carved into stone were there to protect the living from something even worse. But Göbekli Tepe has also attracted more extreme theories. Some have claimed it was an astronomical observatory. Others have argued that its carvings encode constellations. Some suggest Pillar 43 records a comet, impact that triggered a great climatic event. These ideas are fascinating. They spread quickly because they give the site a clean, dramatic explanation. Ancient astronomers, a cosmic warning, a message from the stars. But the physical evidence is not that simple. Many archaeologists remain skeptical of these interpretations. The stones were moved, reused, and altered over long periods. Some enclosures may not have been open-air spaces designed for skywatching, and the symbols may have had meanings rooted in ritual, myth, death, and social identity rather than astronomy. That does not make Göbekli Tepe less mysterious. It makes it more mysterious, because the truth may be stranger than a star map. The truth may be that we are looking at a symbolic world so old that its language has completely vanished, a mythology with no surviving words, a religion with no scripture, a sacred landscape where every animal, every pillar, every skull, and every hidden statue meant something. But the dictionary is gone, and Göbekli Tepe is not alone. For years it seemed like a miracle in isolation, a single impossible site from the dawn of human history. But recent exploration across southeastern Turkey has revealed a much larger picture. Göbekli Tepe appears to be part of a broader prehistoric landscape known as Taş Tepeler, the Stone Hills. Other sites, including Karahantepe, Sayburç, Sefertepe, and Çakmaktepe, show related forms of monumental architecture, carved pillars, human figures, animal imagery, and ritual spaces. This changes the story again. Göbekli Tepe was not a one-time accident, not a strange burst of genius from one isolated group. It was part of a network, a cultural world, a shared symbolic system spreading across the region thousands of years before cities and states. And Karahantepe may be even more unsettling. There, archaeologists have found many T-shaped pillars and strange human-focused imagery. One of the most striking spaces is a rock-cut chamber with a large human head carved from the bedrock staring over a row of upright stone forms. The chamber feels enclosed, intense, almost theatrical. If Göbekli Tepe is dominated by animals and faceless beings, Karahan Tepe seems more obsessed with the human body. Faces, heads, phallic forms, underground rooms. It feels like another chapter of the same lost religion, but with a different emphasis. At Sayburse, carved scenes show humans interacting with dangerous animals, including wild bulls and predators. At other sites, new finds continue to suggest that this region was filled with ritual centers, symbolic imagery, and complex social gatherings long before the rise of what we normally call civilization. And that brings us back to the biggest question of all: why did farming begin? The old answer was practical. Humans discovered agriculture, produced more food, settled down, and then built complex societies. But Göbekli Tepe suggests another possibility. What if farming was not the beginning of religion? What if religion helped push humans toward farming? A massive ritual site requires people. People require food. Feasts require animals, plants, and eventually more reliable supplies. If groups were gathering again and again at places like Göbekli Tepe, they would need dependable resources. Wild grains grew in the region. Over time, the pressure to feed ritual gatherings may have encouraged humans to manage, select, and eventually domesticate plants. In that version of history, the temple does not come after the farm. The temple creates the need for the farm. The sacred gathering creates the pressure. The pressure creates food production. Food production creates settlement. Settlement creates society. And society becomes civilization. That possibility is why Göbekli Tepe matters so much. It is not just old, it changes the order of human history. It suggests that before we organized ourselves around money, territory, or kings, we may have organized ourselves around mystery, around death, around gods, around fear, around the need to stand together before the unknown. But if Göbekli Tepe was so important, why did it end? For a long time, one of the most popular ideas was that the site had been deliberately buried by its builders. It is a powerful image. The people who created the temple returning to cover it with stones, soil, bones, and debris. A ritual burial, a sacred closure, a final act of devotion. As if they were killing the temple or protecting its power from the future. But newer interpretations complicate that story. The end of Göbekli Tepe may not have been peaceful. Some evidence suggests the site may have suffered from slope movement, erosion, collapse, and destructive natural processes. Walls were damaged. Earth and debris filled the enclosures. The builders appear to have made efforts to stabilize areas of the mound. But eventually, the great circular spaces were no longer maintained in the same way. The monumental age ended. Smaller rectangular buildings appeared. The rituals changed. The old giants were buried. And slowly, Göbekli Tepe disappeared beneath the hill. For nearly 10,000 years, the faceless beings waited in darkness. No one remembered their names. No one remembered the chants. No one remembered what the snakes meant, or the vultures, or the headless body, or the skulls, or the hidden human figure inside the wall. And maybe that is the most haunting part of Göbekli Tepe. It is not silent because nothing happened there. It is silent because too much happened there too long ago, and the human memory of it has been erased. Today we can measure the stones. We can scan the mound. We can date organic remains. We can compare carvings. We can map the enclosures. But the inner world of the builders remains just out of reach. We do not know what they called this place. We do not know who was allowed inside. We do not know whether the central pillars were gods, ancestors, spirits, or something else entirely. We do not know if the ceremonies were joyful, terrifying, or both. We do not know whether people came here to celebrate life, confront death, honor the dead, ask for protection, or speak to forces they believed controlled the world. All we know is that they built it, And they built it at a time when, according to the old story, they should not have been able to. That is the power of Göbekli Tepe. It reminds us that human beings were never just practical animals. We were never only hunters, never only survivors. From the very beginning, we were meaning makers. We looked at death and invented ritual. We looked at the sky and imagined realms beyond it. We looked at predators and carved them into stone. We looked at the unknown and gave it a shape. And sometimes that shape was a faceless giant standing in the dark. Göbekli Tepe does not give us easy answers. It gives us better questions. What if civilization did not begin with farming? What if it began with fear? What if the first great human project was not a house or a market or a palace, but a sacred place where people gathered to face something they could not explain? And if that is true, then the story of humanity is not a straight road from caves to cities. It is a circle of stones on a lonely hill, a place where the living met the dead, where animals became symbols, where skulls may have carried memory, where faceless beings watched in silence, and where a hidden human figure was sealed inside a wall, waiting thousands of years to be found. But even now, most of Göbekli Tepe remains buried. Only a fraction has been excavated. The rest is still underground, still sealed, still silent, which means the greatest discovery may not be the stones we have already found. It may be what is still waiting beneath them, because somewhere under that ancient hill, in the darkness below the dust of 12,000 years, there may be another pillar, another skull, another chamber, another face hidden in stone, another message from the first builders of the sacred world. And when it finally emerges, it may force us to rewrite the story of civilization all over again.